The Spanish people have long had an idea that there are moments in a man's life when the scales of life and death balance precariously even. Momentos de verdad, they call it. Moments of truth. My name is Bill Negley. I'm a Texan, and I've had a lifetime of experiences that have brought me to the edge of death and back again. This is my story. I'll tell it in my own words about the life that I have led these past 20 years. Coiba is an island that lies about 15 miles off the western coast of Panama in Central America. The island contains a penal colony. It houses some pretty rough characters. But we haven't come here to break anybody out or serve time ourselves. No, sir. Our hope is to catch the great Pacific sailfish with light fly fishing tackle. One of the world's best fishing clubs is located on Coiba, Club Pacifico. You know, I really love fishing. I love the heart-lifting excitement of firmly hooking a big fish. But that's not really my first love. I have to confess that bow and arrow hunting has been a way of life with me for over 20 years. I've hunted heavy game in situations where most people feel I was crazy for not going in with a gun. But now, 20 years later, am I still sound enough to handle the 100-pound bow? I've done it more years than any other bow hunter, living or dead. Can I do it one more time? Or should I call it quits? Some people say porpoises have developed their own language. I wish I could get them to tell me where those big sails are. Getting yourself ready to fly fish for sale requires a little ritual each time you go out, making sure that nothing is tangled or snarled during our hour-long trip to the fishing grounds off Coiba. Today, while we are fishing for these sails, I'll be giving them a good chance to escape. Maybe too good, my Panamanian boatman Benito says. I'll be fishing with a 10-pound tippet, a 1-foot section test piece in the middle of the leader. After I've finished my preparation, Benito tosses out the teasers to attract the sailfish. Fishing is a great unwinder as you watch and wait, trying to catch sight of a dorsal fin breaking the surface of the water. You get a great opportunity to relax, even do some old-fashioned daydreaming. It's been a long time since I experienced that first moment of truth with my bow. 1957 it was. In the spring of that year, we flew into Nairobi and booked into the classic old Norfolk Hotel. We were outfitting for an unusual hunt, a hunt that would see a wager won or lost. The whole thing started with my feeling that our dwindling supply of game animals need a more even chance. Long-experienced riflemen like myself should lay down the rifle, a fearfully powerful weapon these days, and either limit ourselves to the primitive bow and arrow, or leave the animals alone. These thoughts, expounded over many martinis one evening amongst friends, led to a bet. $10,000 to $1,000. My good friend, fisherman and conservationist Bill Carpenter of Wilmington, Delaware, offered this wager that I could not bring down a mature bull elephant with nothing but a bow and arrow. I accepted, and after 9 months of training, the hunt was on. In those days, game was plentiful and magnificent. We passed by Ripon Falls, the headwaters of the Nile. As we proceeded through the countryside to our hunting site, I thought about my friend's words that the bow was useless against elephant. Maybe he was right. It had never been done before. The Ancoli cattle reminded me of good old Texas longhorns, a bit of home in the middle of Africa. Finally, after several days of hard traveling through the Ruwenzori, Mountains of the Moon, our expedition tied down in the Semiliki River Valley. I immediately struck out on my own to scout the terrain. In the Congo, then, large herds of forest elephants roam freely. Although their ivory is not as heavy as the savanna elephants, they offered me a fair challenge to face the largest land animal on Earth with a bow and arrow. Up to a point, these elephants are approachable because of their poor eyesight. But you cannot get too close or they will charge, especially the cows. From the beginning, I learned that practice and more practice is absolutely essential in order to maintain good hunting discipline. Once you're face to face with your target, there is no time to wonder about your technique. The act of shooting has to be automatic, or else you will find yourself in deep trouble. My bow was especially designed for me by the world-famous archer Fred Bear. Fred's blessing made me feel a bit more confident. If he felt I could get an elephant with a bow of his, well then why shouldn't I feel the same way? From the Walangulu tribe, a group notorious for their unlawful ivory poaching, Eric Rundgren, my Kenya-born and raised guide, suggested I let Duo try his skill at pulling Fred Bear's bow. And he did real well, even though his style was a little less than classic. Finally, we were off across the countryside, making our own roads as we went. Our hunting methods were simple. Accompanied by Duo, I would attempt to approach an elephant, a bull, who stood somewhat apart from the herd. Then we would creep up as close as I felt was necessary to release a shot into the beast's lungs. An arrow in the lungs is always fatal, and it's the best way to bring down any large animal with a bow. That's where the challenge lies. With a gun, you can stand 50-60 yards away and blast your quarry down in the head, in the heart, in the guts. But with the bow, you must approach very close in order to obtain a fatal shot. And of course, then the animal has a chance of spotting you, letting you know that he's there, sometimes to scare hell out of you. A week later, my chance finally came. A good bull watered at the river's edge. I took aim. I sighted down on him. A line seemed to form in front of my eyes, and I felt I could direct my arrow straight to its target, almost by willpower. There was nothing in that forest except me and that elephant. I released. My arrow struck him in the right lung, a deadly shot. We were able to locate him by following the gathering vultures. He was a fine animal. I guessed him to be about 40 years old, about my own age. The point was proven. Elephant can be hunted successfully with a bow. And besides that, I could now give $10,000 to our city museum in San Antonio. It was quite a moment for me. I returned home to Texas a changed man. Never again would I hunt animals with a rifle. And this decision was sometimes hard to justify to my friends. They thought that even if I had proven that bow hunting for big game was possible, why continue to risk my life? All I can say is that I still think hunting should be a dignified sport, not just something to do. These are noble animals, and they deserve our best in training and consideration. If you want to go way back, even before my first elephant bow hunt, you'd have to start in 1956 at the Gage Ranch in Marathon, Texas. It was at this junction in my life that I first became dissatisfied with gun hunting. I just returned from Africa and with heavy rifle had bagged quite a number of animals for museum use. But there was no longer any real challenge. After all, I had been hunting this way for 30 years. I was beginning to feel guilty about how easy it all was. Yet I certainly didn't want to give up hunting, because what I love best is to be in the field, where each and every day may bring a new and special experience. Truly, I like to keep on the move, testing my hunting skills in every locale that I can get to. And wherever I am, I believe in one thing above all, that a true sportsman must always provide the animal with a reasonable opportunity to escape. The animal must have the chance to use its natural skills to rescue itself from the technical skills that man has developed over the ages. The skill that I developed with the gun no longer left the animals any chance for survival. So it was then that I took up the bow. Of course, I was aware of the bow's potential through familiarity with great archers like Howard Hill, Fred Bear, Bob Swinehart, and those early pioneers of bow hunting, Pope and Young. My cousin, Alfred Negley, kindly let me take over a corner of his family's spacious cattle ranch to study the intricacies of stalking with a bow and arrow, although I sometimes caught him out of the corner of my eye shaking his head as he watched me practice hour after hour. My plan was to someday return to Africa and hunt for the same game that I had previously hunted with a gun. but I was not going to go until I felt totally ready, both in mind and body. After practice sessions, I'd drive out into the backcountry, searching for that phantom of the West, the mule deer. I was 40 years old then, and thank God, still willing to change my mind about things. I will never forget the time I spent out on the Gage Ranch training, preparing, learning my limitations and my strengths. And that very next year, 1957, I did return to Africa, buoyed by the proposition of a $10,000 wager on an elephant. Yes, I do start to think about the old experiences out here in the middle of the Pacific. But I got to get back to the business at hand. Sailfish are different from big game animals, of course. You are at their beck and call. Whenever they choose to strike is when the action begins, and you have to be alert and ready for that moment. Then, all at once, we raise our first fish. We see right away it's a bull dolphin, a dorado. Because they make a delicious meal, I decided to bring him in as a treat for the camp. This one went nearly 20 pounds. Benito and I regrouped and again rechecked the lines. Our teasers were the commercially available plastic squid. Although we did once lose the squid and simply substituted rags tied to a length of line. Worked just as well. Most anything is good as long as it wriggles around and creates a disturbance on the surface of the water that the fish can spot and strike. Maybe more than half the battle in sail fishing lies in the hands of the boatman. The instant a strike occurs, he throws the boat out of gear and begins to reel in the teaser. I wait until the teaser is at the exact spot where I can present the fly most accurately. At the same time, the teaser is jerked out of the water, leaving only the fly for the fish. The instant that the fish takes the fly, I set the hook, and Benito stands ready to slap the boat back into gear when he sees that I have the fish firmly hooked. That first sail took off on his tail, slapping across the surface of the water, and the battle was on. After an hour, I thought he was tired, and as Benito tried to gaff him so we could check his possible record size, I let my line slacken, and that was enough for him. He took off like he had just been hooked. And was gone on, the hook pulled away clean, and that was enough for me that day. So Benito turned the boat around, and we headed in. We returned with our companion boat well before dusk to enjoy Club Pacifico's most welcome food and drink. Pancho, the club's pet monkey, greeted me, begging for ice cubes hidden in my pocket. In the evening, temperatures hover around 75 degrees. During the day out in the ocean, the heat climbs to over 90+ degrees, and it's the middle of February here. As I walked up the pathway to my bungalow, I remembered another expedition. It wasn't quite as warm as Panama. Point Hope, Alaska. It lies some 130 miles above the Arctic Circle, 400 miles closer to Siberia than to Fairbanks. I went there in June 1967 to hunt the great white polar bear with bow and arrow. We flew in during a break in the weather. Down below, I saw the fissure in the ice where the Eskimos hunted their whales. For some reason, the whales always return to this one spot in the spring of the year to feed and reproduce. And it was there the Eskimo hunters waited for them. Point Hope, population 350, established, date unknown. There, the Eskimos' graves are marked with Russian Orthodox crosses. The gravestones themselves were made from walrus tusks and whalebone. Soviet influence was quite evident here in the most northern state of the Union. Just like all children all around the world, the kids play and hoop it up. My hosts were Lee and Irma Holen. Lee operated a hunting camp at Point Hope. He's a superb pilot and professional hunter. He's also one of the best fishing guides around during the summer and early fall. Lee's cabin at Point Hope wasn't fancy, but it was warm and comfortable, serving both as his home and his workshop. As always, I began practicing almost as soon as I arrived. Because of my heavy clothing, I had to adapt my bow pull to a 26-inch draw rather than the normal 28-inch. My arrows are black to see them better against the snow, but otherwise they were no different from what I'd used back in Africa. Temperatures dipped to 20 and 30 below at night, got up to no more than 10 below during the day. I was quite anxious to get on with the hunt, as this was my first major outing since the elephant expedition of 1957, 10 years ago. We decided to forego the local method of transportation, dog sled, and utilize our Piper Super Cubs, and search for polar bear tracks from the air. We went out in 2 separate crafts as a safety measure. Piled up ice, crevices, jagged peaks make landings down on that ice floe extremely difficult. In case one plane damages its landing gear, each plane carries with it an extra landing gear V-strut. One plane has the left V, the other plane has the right V-strut. It provided us with some insurance, assuming that both planes didn't pile up on the ice together. We scouted hundreds of square miles from the air before we spotted fresh tracks. Although today the polar bear is a restricted hunting animal, back in 1967 they were still fair game. There he is. We picked a spot and put down quickly. For the moment, the bear disappeared into the white background. Our escort dipped by to see we were all right. We followed the tracks until they were very fresh. We knew we were close. Then, there he was. He spotted us and lumbered over to investigate. Why he didn't keep on coming over the top of that floe, nobody knows. I took an excited shot at him and missed. We silently started after him, trying to outmaneuver that keen-sensed hunter. Once more, he came back to us, almost daring me to shoot. I drew, aimed, and fired. A long shot, nearly 40 yards, but accurate enough. Tracked him and soon found him down. He had been a dangerous adversary, close enough to kill any one of us, but then he changed his mind. We took the pelt back to camp and made ready to return home. Truly one of the most heightened moments of my life, to be face to face with an animal that could have easily killed me. Fascinating. That next year, 1968, I found myself traveling into Angola, where I had another face-to-face date with a killer. This time a full-grown African lion. Angola was the diametric opposite to Alaska. Hot sand and bush rather than ice and snow. We arrived and made contact with our Portuguese hunter, Pedro Milo, who had hired trackers for us from the locals. We took a look at the game that was nearby, and after hearing from villagers about a male lion that was pilfering their cattle, I decided my hunt was set for me. We would try for that lion. Our first tactic was to hang an antelope as bait. The next day, we found that the lion had indeed pulled down our bait and had dragged it some distance away. The killer had left suitable clues behind, this time his tracks in the soft sand. We set out to follow them. Jakara, our tracker, sprinted in front of our Land Rover, and sometimes it was tough for us in the four-wheeler to keep up with him. The going was rough in spots. The lion knew we were back there, trailing him relentlessly. We followed him for 3 days. Stopping, picking up his trail again each successive day, then moving on. Finally, on the third day, a fresh track. We were getting close. Pedro urged his trackers on. Each hunt for me has always had its own sense about it, right or wrong. For some unexplainable reason, I felt uneasy. Once we were sure we had picked up the trail, Jakara moved off in front of us at a gallop. Suddenly, Jakara frantically pointed dead ahead. We had bayed the lion on a fallen tree. He was as tired as we were and angry that we had caught up with him. This was the moment, for me, for all of us. My arrow struck him hard, a fatal shot just back of the lungs, but nowhere near enough to knock him down. He turned and charged. Pedro had got off that shot just in time. It had been the lion's life or mine, or any other member of our party. But before Pedro had been able to level his rifle and fire, the lion had swiped at me, burying his claws into my arm. That lion knew I was the one that had hurt him, and he had charged with one thought in mind. Here in Angola, as a last desperate measure, and because we had not hunted skillfully, the backup gun was necessary. This became the tragedy of the moment, and the shock of that lion's charge, his death, hung long over us that day. At this point, a new thought crossed my mind. I must learn to hunt these noble animals on a more equal footing. No big brother standing behind me. No backup gun at all. Let my professional hunter carry a pair of binoculars and just watch. Each morning while I'm at Club Pacifico, I get up early, have a quick... The requirements for skill and patience and force are there in fly fishing, of course, but none of the fear. We ended the week hooking up a big black marlin who promptly broke the leader and was gone in seconds. Someday I might try for his younger brother. Some 3 months later, I decided to go to Key West, Florida. I feel the yen to try again, to fish for another fighter, the tarpon. Here at the southernmost tip of the United States, these fish can tip the scales at well over 100 pounds. My guide is Bob Montgomery, the leading tarpon guide in this area. His boat is the Blue Runner, a specially built skiff powered by a 135 horsepower Evinrude outboard motor. Top speed 55 miles an hour. Bob takes me through the Mangrove Keys, 30 miles to the west, to the Marquesas, the only true atoll in the Atlantic. Here in the water, 2 to 15 feet deep, we stop and set up shop. For tarpon, we choose a 5-inch streamer fly. It consists of a hook and feathers, but no cork, permitting the fly to travel underwater. The hook has to be hand-sharpened to penetrate the tarpon's bony mouth. The water is crystal clear. Today, we brought along our underwater photographer to shoot some film. Tarpon rarely appear on cue. From our anchored position, Bob and I stand and watch for tarpon as they swim through, passing along a shallow channel between 2 broad flats. Bob spots one. But in my excitement, the cast is poor and the fish turns and disappears. So we stand and wait, and wait. Patience is not the least of the fisherman's virtues. I begin to remember another expedition, which was quite a test of my patience, to say the least. Zambia, in the Luanga Valley. I was there during September. And this is what makes them such a great game fish. Then, as quickly as our luck changed for the good, it flips back again. The tarpon disappeared. Bob insists that we stick around for a while longer, but the more I wait, the more I think about times when the action never stopped. I think about the last time I had gone bow hunting and how I nearly laid it all down. I returned to Angola in the fall of 1971. I plan to hunt in the Makuso concession, which lies along the Kabango River in southeastern Angola. The only access to these regions is by bush plane. Our outfitter has hired bushman trackers, and their families joined them for the duration of the hunting season. Their camp was always a lively place, spiced with music, clapping, and song. One of the group's meat hunters showed me his weapon. A steel-tipped arrow packed with a nerve poison that kills the animal that it hits within minutes. Quite effective even on large animals like buffalo. My rhino bow with its 100-pound pull had the bushman wondering why I owned a bow so difficult to use. They had more fun with it than I did. The Makuso is one of the last great game reserves in Africa. The last time, back in 1968, when I was in the Makuso, as I traveled back and forth across the territory in search of that line, I recalled that game was plentiful then. By 1974, before a full-scale war had broken out in Angola, the Makuso still remained a fine game territory. In the Makuso, these animals have lived for thousands of years in the same manner, having no reason to change. Their environment quite comfortable, their lives undiminished. lion and the leopard living side by side in a balance dictated by hundreds of years of hunting coexistence. Game in abundance. The Cape buffalo. The sable antelope. Saddleback jackals. The ostrich. The zebra. The warthog trots freely. With the roan and the smaller antelope close by. Greater kudu, the gray ghost. The largest antelope in Africa, the eland. The makuso, beasts and fowl in plenty. Nobody knows for sure how political upheavals will affect wildlife. Perhaps man will eliminate his natural environment through wars and conflagration. I'd been requested by the Carnegie Museum of Natural History of Pittsburgh to procure for them a black rhino specimen. I accepted, grateful for the chance to go back, perhaps for the last time, and hunt big game once more with bow and arrow. Only this time to do it the way I felt it should be done. That is, with no backup gun around. Our plan was simple. The rhino come in from the bush at night and drink at this local watering hole. Then before dawn, they leave once more for the deep bush. With my guide and tracker, I arrived at the riverbed just at dawn, looking for those fresh rhino tracks. Once we spotted a fresh set of tracks, the hunt began for the day. While I strung up my bow and readied all my bow equipment, my bushman tracker, Halika, ran ahead of the hunting party, following the tracks of the rhino. He made sure that he was after the right animal by constantly checking the size of the footprints. Following the correct set of tracks is a difficult part of rhino hunting, since 3 or 4 different rhino might have watered at the same hole during the night. As soon as my arrows were ready, the other 2 trackers and I took off in pursuit of Halika. One of the delights of hunting on foot was that I was able to observe other animals quite closely. Animals which normally would run at the sound of a Jeep or Land Rover. Halika's ability to discern rhino tracks on that hard ground was just short of supernatural. had an extra sense about it which is unexplainable, and his endurance is extraordinary. Some 5 or 6 hours after we spotted our first rhino tracks, Halika spotted him and ran back to let us know. After a plan of approach was set, I was on my own. I cautiously maneuvered into position while my men waited anxiously on the sidelines. That black rhino, fully grown, stands about 5 feet high at the shoulder and weighs in the neighborhood of 3,600 pounds. When you are standing 20 yards away from a brute of an animal like that, there's no time to lose your composure. Nevertheless, I flinched and missed. Time seemed to hang in midair. For one long moment, that rhino and I locked stares while he made up his mind what to do. That moment seemed to last forever. Then he charged. Fortunately, an elephant or rhino that has not been struck by an arrow will almost never press home a charge. Having sent me flying, this rhino simply pulled up and went his separate way. And so that day's hunt was over. So the next day, and for the next 25 days, we began a search for the rhino that would provide the Carnegie Museum of Natural History with what they required. Once, Halika found us a good-looking female with a several-month-old offspring. But I aborted this hunt. That baby would have had no chance in the bush without its mother. Then a week later, we ran into still another cow and her young. and once again we let them run away unharmed. During those 3.5 weeks, I had several good shots at large specimen rhinos, but I was unable to bring one down. Of course, with a rifle, any one of them could have easily been killed. The bow requires great patience and as much understanding of the animal as you can muster. Then, on the 25th day of hunting, Alika located a big male for me. This rhino, although it kept edging away from me, had a positive feeling about it. I knew this was it. The rhino paused in a thick clump of bush, and for a moment I was concerned about firing and hitting the overhanging branches. But I aimed and drew and fired. He was hit hard, high up behind the shoulder, and I knew he was ours. We trailed him for about 200 yards and found him dead in a small thicket. He had lasted about 30 seconds. As I took measurements and data for the museum and made arrangements for the skeleton to be shipped back to the United States, I felt a certain regret that this hunt might be my last one. The strain of training with heavy bows and avoiding angry animals was beginning to take its toll on me. As I reached the age of 60 years, maybe I should start thinking about something else. Now the tarpon have gone for the day, Bob and I decide to call it quits. But as I make my way back to San Antonio, I can still feel the pull of the bush country, and I think about Africa and its ever-changing adventures. Perhaps. And then last May, during the International Game Conference, I revisited the Lone Star Hall, a magnificent educational museum in San Antonio, to which I and many others have made contributions over the years. This ivory was donated 20 years ago now. And then the polar bear. Lord, that was close. And that angry lion. I can still feel his claw. and that unpredictable rhino of the Makuzo. Lots and lots of memories here, but hunting and fishing the way I do, I really do very little damage. My, how a man can rationalize what he longs to do. And so I'm going back. I will train again and go back to the bush that I love and hunt the noblest animals of all, and in a way that may or may not cause them or me any damage at all.